Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Buff Naggle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Buff Naggle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Zach, and we got a fantastic show today where we're going to be looking back on a couple things with nice rose-colored glasses and figuring out what that means about life. However, I definitely can't do this one alone. So as always, I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are you doing today?
Zach, I am on top of the world looking down on creation, and the only explanation I can find. You know what that's from? That's a song. Do you know that?
No.
Okay, that's a 70s song. I'm on top of the world. Hey, thanks, listeners, for being here. Without you, we wouldn't be anything. Well, we'd just be me and Zach having another conversation. Thanks to you, Buff Nagel, the podcast is a global top 10% podcast. We are reachable at buffnagel@buffnagel.com. As I'm sure you know, we're all over the internet. Zach, we are everywhere out there. You know, the other day I was driving in my car and the little warning light came on, and you have to push that little button to scroll through the things. And I did it, scrolled through the warnings, and finally got to the warning, and it said, "Listen to the Buff." I mean, we are everywhere. We are showing up absolutely everywhere. Hey, if you are new to this podcast, welcome. We are glad you are here. Hey, give us 4 episodes and we'll give you a reason to come back. We're talking about lots of different things and surely something will resonate with you. Remember, tell a friend to listen and you will get a free episode. Hey, and you should subscribe too. Zach, subscribe, hit the smiley star button, whatever it is to make you like us. And then write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else it is. And you know what happens if we get a 5-star review, Zach?
I don't.
I get pudding and you get brownies. It is a great thing to have happen. So anybody out there could use some pudding tonight. So send us something your way. Zach, I'm phenomenal. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, as I mentioned, we're looking back on things with some rose-colored glasses, but we're doing that in a unique and a different way. There's a movie called Midnight in Paris, which stars Owen Wilson, which therefore means it has to be one of the best movies of all time. It's like Nick Cage. Nick Cage is in the movie; it's automatically good. If Owen Wilson is in the movie, it's also automatically good.
So what if? Okay, so I'm thinking about this because those guys, even though they're very different people and different characters, they have these elements of them that, like, if you took Owen Wilson and if you put Nicolas Cage, he wouldn't change a lot to be Nicolas Cage. And Nicolas Cage, if you just kind of like mellowed him down, he'd become Owen Wilson, I think. And so to me, it's not like you're like Stallone and like Emma Watson. I mean, those two are very different, right? But Owen Wilson and Nicolas Cage, very similar guys. We're big fans of Owen Wilson here at the Buff.
We're big fans of Nick Cage as well.
And Nick Cage, right? Because they both do our things. And this movie,
Nick Cage was in National Treasure, which is a national treasure.
It is a national treasure. In fact, National Treasure and National Treasure 2. All right. And is there a third one?
There is a TV show in the making.
A TV show. Okay. All right. Anyway, that's Owen Wilson is in Midnight in Paris, and Midnight in Paris is a movie that we stumbled onto. Zach, do you remember when we first saw this?
I believe I saw it in my brother's apartment in Tacoma, Washington.
Yes, we were there for Thanksgiving, and we were all crammed into his tiny little apartment for the weekend. We were like, what are we going to do? And we were stuck. I was like, you know what? I'm going to Netflix. We're picking a movie. And I picked this movie with Owen Wilson.
Did you see it before you saw it with us?
I hadn't seen it. I had never seen it. But it's got, who's the girl in it?
Not Owen Wilson?
Not Owen Wilson, but she's very pretty, and that's fun, and that's worth watching. And it's Owen Wilson because he's Owen Wilson, and that's worth watching. And it's full of all sorts of zany, but it also has a story and an idea about nostalgia.
Yeah, it does. So Owen Wilson is a writer, Geoffrey Chaucer, the writer, like that. But he's a Hollywood script writer. He's not very excited about his job. That's kind of his character. If you know someone who's like, oh, I have this job, I do it, they're not super excited about it. It doesn't spark joy the same way Nick Cage's character does in National Treasure when he gets to go treasure hunting. There is not that spark of joy. But what he really wants to do is he wants to write a book. He wants to write a book because he wants to be more than just a Hollywood scriptwriter. And that's, kind of this being and this essence of him as a person. And you see him transform over the course of a movie, someone who takes on and comes into the light of that role, as him being like, I am a writer and this is who I am, as he ditches the persona of who he was as a Hollywood scriptwriter.
But he's very, I mean, he's one of these guys that you wonder how he makes it like when the light turns green, he's kind of like, well, I'm not sure I should go. Maybe somebody's going to want to be turning. I'm not sure. He can't make up his mind. He has very little
decisiveness.
He's not very decisive. He's not very passionate about anything other than, Zach, they are in Paris in the movie, right? And he wants to go back to the golden age of Paris, the Paris of the Roaring '20s. And he said it must have been awesome there. And all he's talking about is
the art and the literature and the great works that were produced in 1920s Paris, 1920s, culture as a whole. And he's just, infatuated with the city and what this city would be like in a different time. And if he could live there, what would he be like?
Right. And he sees himself as I really want to go back there and I want to be part of that. And of course, his girlfriend, his fiance, she doesn't want to have anything to do with that. She's got these other friends. There's so many great characters in here, Zach. I don't want to spend the time talking about the whole movie, but she's got an old friend from college named Paul, and Paul is a pedantic, he's a jerk. Right? He's a pseudo intellectual. He's the guy that knows everything, but he's always wrong. All right. But he speaks with such confidence. He's kind of the opposite of Gil, the main guy, in that he's confident, but he's wrong. And Gil is generally right, but he has no confidence about himself. And Inez and Paul, you can see there's a thing going on with them, and Gil just doesn't want any part of that. So one night he goes wandering around the streets of Paris just to appreciate the beauty, and something miraculous happens.
Yeah, he gets into a car that time travels him to the 1920s. So this movie hits all of the things we like. It has Owen Wilson and it has time travel. What else do you need?
The only other thing would be the Renaissance, and that actually shows up in here too. So
that shows up later, yeah.
So he gets transported back to the 1920s, and it's the roaring. It's not like he just shows up like in the suburbs, sending his kids to school and mowing his lawn and working some 9-to-5 job on the internet. I mean, he goes back into the cultural center of the 1920s. He runs into Cole Porter playing piano in a party. He runs into F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda. The greatest character in here, Zach, the greatest secondary character is Ernest Hemingway.
I disagree. I think it's Picasso, but...
Well, okay, and what's really interesting about this, and I hadn't thought about this, if you want to, after you listen to The Buff, if you want, you can go listen to Bishop Barron does a discussion of it's just a little baby discussion of the movie, but he points out that the characters are written in this movie as the stereotypic presentation of the characters in history, right? So if somebody talks about Hemingway, what do you hear about him? He's tough. And he writes,
he's a man's man.
Yeah, and he says, "Do you box? Why don't you box?" And he wants, and he.
The interesting thing about Hemingway, if you haven't read Hemingway, I don't have a Hemingway book in reach right now, or else I would pull an expert from it. But he writes very bluntly. He's like, he doesn't describe things with the flowing poetic nature of a Tolkien. Instead, it's a very blunt force trauma description of what it's like walking around in the streets of New York or whatever it may be. He's very straight and forward in that regard, and his character speaks like Hemingway writes, which is hilarious on two levels.
Yeah, and to me, it's one of the great acting jobs too. There's a couple scenes where this guy goes nonstop with this Hemingway-esque diatribes into how a man should live and how he should not fear death. And there is some great stuff in there about Ernest Hemingway. And he meets all sorts of other people too. He meets Belmonte, the bullfighter, is Hemingway's friend. And they all center around Gertrude Stein, who ran who ran the cultural center there with writers and artists coming in. He meets Picasso, like you said, and then he meets Picasso's girlfriend. All right. And he starts falling for Picasso's girlfriend.
Yeah, so he falls in love with this girl because this girl represents this cultural thing that he wanted to be a part of and to live, and he gets to, he's always talking about, oh, to listen to Cole Porter, oh, to like write a book like Hemingway, oh, to know what Zelda Fitzgerald was like, but he got to like live it in a way at night in Paris, and it was just like him being able to like drift into this nostalgia world of like, oh, this is everything I wanted. Why would I ever go back to where I live? Why don't I just live here? It's great and wonderful and perfect.
And then the very interesting thing happens is that one night when he's out with the girl, those two are sitting there on a park bench and a horse and carriage comes up. And they get in the horse and carriage. And this is like in what the movie Inception, Zach, where it's a dream within a dream within a dream. All right. So now those guys go back to the Belle Époque, the time period at the end of the 1800s, the beautiful time, according to the French. And they make it to Moulin Rouge and they run into the Impressionists who, and Adriana is enamored with Belle Époque. She really wants to go back there. Gil's like, no, we should stay in the 20s because that was beautiful. And they talk to the Impressionists back in the 1890s.
And they're like,
and they want to
Renaissance.
They want to go back to the Renaissance, right? So there's this overriding theme. Here's the theme, all right? The theme is that no matter where you are, there's a piece in the past that looks glorious and grand to you. But to the people who were there, they're living in the same, I don't know, they're working with the same lag function. All right. So they are back one generation, one period of time, one cultural step. Yeah. And so you always have that. Zach, you have like, I look back on, there's a scene in the movie Catch Me If You Can, where the guy who's the thief, he gets captured in Paris or in France, and he gets brought back to New York, and he escapes out of the plane. He makes it back to his house, and he sees his mother and father. No, he sees his mother and his mother's new husband. Yeah, stepfather. Yeah, and they are in there enjoying this nostalgic Christmas, and he's not there, and he feels that same nostalgia, and that nostalgia, Zach, is put in the same. That's my time. I can see what he's looking at because that's the Christmas that I knew as a kid. But I'm sure you have to look back on your childhood things like wasn't the world great when all you had was a Game Boy?
Yeah,
right?
I didn't have to worry about like bills or other school and other things that take away my fun.
But you did fantasy football with paper and pencil, right?
Yeah.
You remember doing that? And we did the NCAA tournament on paper brackets. And so we did all that stuff before the computers came in. And I'm sure you look nostalgically back on that. I look back on the days in the 70s. Nobody had a smartphone. Nobody had a cell phone. You'd tell your friends, hey, I'll meet you there at 8 o'clock. And sometimes they were there and sometimes they weren't. And if they weren't, then, well, they missed out or you missed out, depending on how it was.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that happens. And this whole movie, what it does is Owen Wilson's character, his perspective of the world shifts. And he's like, yes, that time was wonderful, but I get to live now. And we do this all the time in society. We talk about the golden ages, or if you're a comic book fan, there's the golden age of comic books. Well, the time when comic books were printed and they were a big deal and they were a cultural icon. And then in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they kind of dropped below out of people's guidelines. And now we have all these comic book movies and people are like back into it. And it's just like, but the stories are different, and the stories that the movies are based on the golden age stories. And there's this whole nostalgia thing of like referencing back to what was instead of living in what is. And I see this personally a lot all the time as a sports fan. You always hear that, oh, in the 1970s football, they did this stuff and that was great. And I'm just like, was it? And I see it a lot in hockey culture of like, well, in the 70s, there were fights all the time and that was good. And those guys were showing that they were tough. And I'm looking at him, it's like, that's a concussion. That's a concussion. That's a broken face. Like, do we need that? And should we be, as people who have, are looking back nostalgically at something, we shouldn't be saying, oh, it was great when they did that stuff. we can say they did that stuff because that was the time period and it was great that we had it. But we've evolved past that. We've evolved forward into now thinking about, hockey as a more speed and skill based game. Or maybe it's, the way that literature and news is portrayed in different ways. And there's this new creation that we get to live in and we get to appreciate. I can talk about growing up with, I grew up in the Harry Potter generation, which, nostalgically to someone who grew up in the Lord of the Rings or the Chronicles of Narnia generation, their idea of fantasy worlds was different. And they can be like, well, our fantasy worlds had this. It's like, that's great. And they set a baseline and they set a foundation for what Harry Potter could exist upon. And now it is our job as the next generation of writers, poets, or whatever it may be, to build upon the worlds of Harry Potter, to build upon those art and literature that came before us. So we're not just thinking back and saying, oh, look how great that was. Instead, we get to create our own greatness.
Yeah, there's just a million things I want to say around that, because there's you hit on so many things that are I guess I'll call in the now. We look back, and a lot of times we look back nostalgically. We look back toward, with a longing for, that means longing for home. All right, it's the bittersweet feeling, the pain that comes from trying to get back home and you can't. Right, that's nostalgia. So we have, on one hand, we do that. We say, wow, wasn't that great? On the other hand, there's a whole generation of people that are saying anything that happened prior to me right now, look how evil and terrible they are. Look, they all smoked. They were misogynist toward women. They, blacks were enslaved 150 years ago. I mean, so all these things were bad. There's no question they were bad. But those people you live in time. You have to live in your now, right? God put you in 2022 listening to this podcast for a reason. Well, maybe you're listening to this in the future, but you're not listening to this in the past, all right? But you are where you are for a reason, all right? And you have to live where you are. And if you focus yourself in the past, you're going to do two things. You're going to long for things you can't get, and you're going to think that you are superior to people that came before you just because you are advanced technologically.
And that happened with the Renaissance. We talked about it in Midnight in Paris. There was a group of people like, oh, the Renaissance was the peak. It was the Enlightenment. There was this change and this greatness in art and literature and architecture, the big three there. But was it though, or was it just the next shift in evolution, and it was this so glorious and grand in that time frame? There was glorious and grandness in the 1920s in American literature. American literature fundamentally changed in the 1920s. That doesn't mean that American literature can't fundamentally change in 2022. Like, stop. We get so nostalgic of it, like that was then, and we can't move past that, or that was what it was. But we got to appreciate what that was,
and you have to appreciate it in its time. And you really can't do that until you have experienced something that you held really great, and then as you move on, you realize, yeah, that wasn't as great as I thought it was. Or you move on, you thought it was really bad, and then as you move on, you're like, well, that really was pretty good. Like in 1977, 78, sometime when I was in middle. Yeah, you weren't around. All right, but I was in middle school, and we read Michael Crichton's The Andromeda Strain, right? And that book, I mean, Michael Crichton was a licensed physician. He went to medical school, and he wrote a book that blew people out of the water. The Andromeda Strain became, like, it was a movie, it was a TV show. He had like computer printouts in the book. I mean, this was not Dickens. This was not Henry James. This was not F. Scott Fitzgerald. This was a new thing. This was a science thriller with an alien probe. And I remember reading, it was one of the few books, Zach, I didn't read much when I was a kid. I read now, but I didn't read much when I was a kid. I think that was the only book I really read up until I got into high school. But I look back on it, and I've read it since then. And I thought, in its time, it was phenomenal. But in comparison to what it wrought, it gave all the, like the Matthew Riley books, now blow it out of the water. But you can't make the comparison. because
But they're
the
all
arms training
built
was
on
back
each
then.
other. You look at, I'm going to bring up the Renaissance again in architecture. The biggest thing that came from the Renaissance was not the fantastic paintings; it was the architecture, in my opinion. As much as I love Renaissance art, and Renaissance art is amazing, and I will talk about Raphael's School of Athens for way too many hours until the day I die. Oh wait, I've done that before. Well, I'll still do it. Regardless, the architectural changes, the great glorification that came with architecture, we have, maybe we have lost in a certain way. Architecture today is not as pretty and grandiose as architecture from the Renaissance, but also architecture from the Renaissance was not as functional as architecture today. So we have evolved and changed. It's like you said with an Andromeda. Michael Crichton was a fantastic writer. He changed what these world adventure thriller type books could be. He created almost a new genre overnight. And it has created so many good books that are important to my life today. And I know, sure, I can, let my kids read them at some point in the future, way down the road. And there might be better books then, grander books then. But that doesn't mean that those books aren't important to culture. That doesn't mean that those books aren't important to the memories you had of them. Like, I know as a kid, I loved running around in the woods. If I tried to run around in the woods today, I would like blow out the knee, blow out my other knee, blow out the same knee again. Like it would not be good, but I can still appreciate the time spent in nature because my time spent there, the thing I'm doing there has evolved and changed as I've evolved and changed. And that's something I think we get so nostalgic about the fact that, well, back then we did things that way. It's like, yeah, we did. And that's how they were. But now we have evolved and changed. And you see this in Owen Wilson's character because he has his enlightened moment when people are talking about the Renaissance. It's like, well, maybe.
Wait. He got enlightened when
Yeah.
talking about the Renaissance?
Yeah.
Nice. I see what you did there. Excellent.
Yeah, that's in my prep notes of the fun jokes to add. And it's, right there. Yeah.
No, it is it's a difficult balance, right? And we've talked about this, Zach, about staying on the berm in the middle of the road. On one hand, you can decide to not grow, to stay where you were. I could still have a 70s haircut and wide lapels. All right. Let me rephrase that. I could still embrace my 70s haircut and my wide lapels. All right. Or I could try to throw all that off like it didn't happen. All right. And then only be hip to the scene today. Fashion changes, literature changes, architecture changes. All right. But what's got to be underneath there, Zach, I think, has got to be this. There has to be some common principle for what makes it good. All right. And that's what we've talked about this before. Truth, beauty, and goodness. We want to seek those things. And whether we're talking about modern architecture or architecture from the Renaissance, we're talking about literature Crichton wrote in the 70s or what Fitzgerald wrote in the 20s, we have to measure it against that. We can't, and you have to look at it in its time, measured against its peers and the age that it was. People were going through different things. I thought of this a while back, Zach. People talked that Fitzgerald wrote between the wars, right? Yep. But he didn't write between the wars. He wrote after the Great War, period. Because they didn't know that war was coming. They didn't know the new one was. And it's really easy for us to look back at Normandy and like, yeah, they stormed Normandy and they conquered the Nazis and everything was great. They didn't know that. They were climbing the cliffs. They didn't know if they were going to win. They had no idea. They didn't know what was going to happen. And it's really difficult to put yourself in their shoes, knowing that what we know now.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Fitzgerald between the wars, and as a history nerd, I get to talk about this stuff. We do a discredit to history when we binarily bin historical movements and things like that. Like the Renaissance is, I think, the perfect example. Yes, the Renaissance was great. Yes, it was a period of time between late 1300s and late 1500s of an explosion of art and science and all of those good things that are foundational pillars of community and living and what it means to be a human. But those people at the time, they didn't know that. They were just exploring and learning things. I think we have gotten to a point as as a culture and as a society, what we look at now, like, oh, we're now in the age of space exploration with all the things with like Elon Musk and NASA and SpaceX, and they're doing those things. No, we're at the age of taking this thing to the next level. The same way that Renaissance artists realized that, like, hey, look, I can draw and paint in this new fun fresco way, and it can be big and grand and bold.
Hey,
And
look,
they did,
I have vanishing point perspective.
yeah, and most art before that didn't have that. It was just they were just like, oh, I get this thing, I can do this. Ooh, I'm creative, and then they express themselves and they do it. And then we come back later, looking back, and like, well, this time these guys were doing this because they didn't know about. We get so focused on the fact of what happened after a certain event that we forget about that these people were living in the moment now. And when we nostalgically look back on things, when we name things as golden ages and we enlighten them and we lift them up, what we do is we forget that we're living in our present where we get the opportunities to do the same thing. We might be living in the golden age of podcast. We don't know that right now. But what we do know is that we can make a podcast that genuinely and positively impacts people in some way. We don't know what the future holds for that, but it could be something like that.
I've heard it said that when new art forms come into being, they very quickly have their peak, and then they kind of become they become uh, less grand, less good, right? So we may actually be in the golden age of podcasting. It'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out, Zach. There are millions of podcasts out there. All right. And there's only a finite, the people who listen to this show, how many podcasts do you have on your phone? What, you got 5, 7, maybe? How do you find time to listen to all that stuff? All right. We are figuring out how this is going to work. Zach, I remember, you don't remember this, having an answering machine for your phone?
I do remember having an answering machine.
Okay. So we had an answering machine when I was a little kid. My dad had one, because that was the only thing that allowed him to get out of the house when he was on call. All right, he would have an answering machine, and you would call my dad if he needed doctoring, and then he would, if he was not home, he would tell you to call the hospital and have him paged on the beeper, which was a little machine he wore on his belt, and it went beep, and when it beeped, he had to call the hospital, and he would say, "Hi, who called me?" And then he would call that person back. And it was really freeing for him. It was this brand new technology. By the time I got to graduate school, Zach, I had the answering machine of answering machines. It had 2 tapes, one for cassette tapes, one for your message that you left for others, and one for the messages they left for you. My phone, even, Zach, it allowed you to call it and play it over the phone. You could check your messages remotely. And it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal to have that thing. And people spent lots of money getting custom made recordings for like, who does anything now other than, "Hi, leave a message." Boop. That's gone. This whole, and a lot of times you don't even say it because you let somebody else do that, or you don't even talk on the phone. You just send a text message. So it is an interesting thing. I don't know where we are in the history of podcasting. I don't know where we are in the history of radio. I listened to the radio today, Zach, for the first time in a long time because I forgot my phone. I didn't have my podcast with me. It was amazing to listen to the radio. The nostalgia thing is, it is a longing we all have. And I've heard people say that we get most nostalgic about Christmas, right? I've heard this said. There's like, you can get nostalgic about sports. You can get nostalgic about school, about high school romance. But I heard that everyone gets nostalgic about Christmas. And the issue is that we were built to long for something. We long to return home to God. And Christmas, in its foundation, shows you the relationship between God and man. And that is why Christmas invites such nostalgia. Now, it doesn't hurt that it's filled with ritual and it's filled with tradition and family meals and all those things. And certainly here in the Northern Hemisphere with snow and wintertime, and it's filled with interesting beauty and all sorts of other exciting things about Christmas. And presents don't hurt either. But at its heart is this longing to return to God, and nostalgia is the pain that says you cannot get back, not on your own.
Yeah, and it's the idea that we had the great moment, and we want to relive that great moment, and we hold that moment above other moments, and we compare them, and we dissect them, and we say, well, this Christmas wasn't as good as Christmas in 2007 because X, Y, and Z, and we change our expectations, and when we do that, we sacrifice the present and the moments and the genuine ability to connect to others. And when you don't have that, when you lose that, you lose a part of your identity and a part of your soul, and it allows it even harder to go back and create those moments in the future.
Yeah, the lesson is, I guess, the lesson from the nostalgia discussion, the lesson from the movie, from the Midnight in Paris, is to live in the now, live in your age, in your day, live today. And we talked on the Christmas special, Zach, when it really hit me. I was like, the only thing I want for Christmas from you is just to be.
Yep.
I want you to be here with me now. And we have a tremendous opportunity in the world we live in now. Like, you're in Minnesota right now. I'm in Indiana, but we're here at least as together as we can be doing the show as we do it. And I just, like I said, the things I miss most about the whole COVID thing is being in the now with people I care about. It has made it really, really difficult.
And that's you being nostalgic about things that happened 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, which, it is memories and moments that we seek and we hold on to. And, people in the 50s, they didn't have the ability that we have now. If something like that, like COVID would happen in the 50s, they don't have the face-to-face voice internet communications that we have. So we need to be grateful and appreciative of that, because we have what we have, and we need to make the best use of it while we have time here.
Yeah, I hear that. Looking back at some of these episodes, when I drove last week to Colorado, to Grand Junction, Colorado, and then I drove back this weekend. And on the way back, I was on I-70. On the way there, I was on I-70. On the way back, I was also on I-70 in Colorado. We went through the Eisenhower Tunnel, Zach.
Yes.
Like we talked about in the Eisenhower episode. And I mentioned at one point, I think in the Eisenhower episode, about the most beautiful bridge in Colorado. And the bridge itself is not particularly beautiful, but the view from the bridge is. And I noted as we drove, I want to tell you all what that bridge is, okay? That bridge is at exit 254 on I-70 westbound in Colorado. And if you go to the Google machine and you ask it, where did I put? Oh, here it is. If you ask it to show you an image of Colorado exit I-70 254 or exit 254 on I-70, it will show you that image. And it is it's from like the Genesee Bridge, I think is what it's called. And it is the most gorgeous view of the mountains from the road. That's the one we were talking about. I didn't have it at a time when we recorded that episode, but I saw it this weekend, and it was as brilliant as ever, Zach. And there are always those wonderful things we get to look at.
Yeah, and there's always wonderful moments that we get to appreciate in our life now. Yes, it would be wonderful to live and see and experience a Renaissance history, because I'm a nerd like that. It would be amazing to, walk beside, maybe not, walk near Alexander the Great and to see what he did. It would be interesting to see Caesar cross the Rubicon, but we don't get to live those moments. We get to live the moments we have here now. We need to appreciate those moments the best that we can, because we never know when they're going to disappear.
Yeah, you don't know that, like 50, your kids or your grandkids might say, wait, you and Grandpa had a podcast? Like, how could you even do that? Because they won't let you upload to the internet anymore. They might say that, or they might be like, wait a minute, you had a podcast, you had to record it, you couldn't just you couldn't live broadcast it. You had to edit on your own. It didn't automatic. I mean, there's all sorts of things that they will look back and they will wonder, what in the world were we doing back here? But, we have our time now. Yes. This is our time. This is, what did Herb Brooks say? This is your time. This is your time.
So go out there and take it.
Yeah. So that's nostalgia. That is Gil. Pender, the protagonist in Midnight in Paris, and I recommend it as high as I can recommend a movie, simply because it is just so much fun, and I just love the
And there
Hemingway
are so
character.
many good little cultural things. They talk about different types of art movements, the surrealists, the realists, the Hemingways, like all of that is tied in and created into the world, and it's a beautiful thing to witness if you know anything about those movements. If you don't, it's a cool thing to learn, and it provides you that peek behind the curtain, as they say, into what that type of movement was and looked like. And I don't know, it's a fun story. It tells you a lot about life, and eventually at the end, Gil realizes that he needs to he is appreciative of what the 20s was, but he knows that his life has more meaning when he lives at the
Now,
time he's supposed to.
yeah, he lives now. Yeah, it is. So it's a lot of fun, and it's a pretty good story. It's there's some lighthearted moments. There's some moments where you're like, please don't, and there's some cringe moments. Right. I think it is probably PG-13 for a reason. But you know what? If you're any sort of grown up with any sort of morals, you can tackle a movie like that. I'm not worried about you. So that's our recommendation this week is Midnight in Paris. Zach, that's what I got.
Yeah, that's all I have. Yeah, it's been a good day talking and reflecting on all of this. But as always, I want to thank you all for listening. I want to remind you to go seek the good, be the good, and spread the good. Enjoy the adventure of life.